culture, even while young adults were all into their wildness. You saw the same thing happening in the 1920s. So during the 1920s, when the older generation, young adults, were the flappers and they're doing barnstorming and rum running and all the things that the veterans who came back from World War I were doing. The Peers of Hemingway and Fitzgerald. I mean, they were a wild crowd, and they drank a lot. So they were a wild generation. They put the roar into the Roaring '20s. But meanwhile, the kids were being protected. The first Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Campfire Girls, 4-H clubs. And by the time you had, for 20-year-olds, the first Miss Americas in 1923, we were building huge college stadiums for the younger generation, right? So this would have been the equivalent of the millennials. And they were all becoming used to the spirit of optimism, cooperation, national unity. So finally, when we had the Great Crash, a huge plurality of them voted for FDR.
Yes.
And they voted for the New Deal.
That's right.
And so the New Deal was incredibly favored by younger people. Just like, I mean, you all seen the polls. You see how, millennials all vote for the Democratic Party. Xers are now actually arguably the most pro-Republican group out there, and like the last generation, who was always, lean more to the Republican Party. But what Xers need to do is adjust themselves to this new communitarian ethos, because one way or another, they're going to have to live with it, right? That's where the country's going. And I think that's going to be the interesting transformation. And so people who are into personal transformation. So in fact, I was going to ask you, Tony. It was actually one of my questions that I came with my own list too. So the question I was going to ask, you're a person who has spent your entire career really perfecting to an unequaled level, in my opinion, personal transformation. I mean, I wonder, but I'm sure you would disagree. How can you take it any further than you've taken it? But I know you have things you still want to do, right? But in other words, and a lot of your base has always been Xers, right?
Yes.
And that's what they're into: personal,
Boomers
individual
and Xers.
transformation. Yeah, boomers and Xers.
Yeah.
What about your next stage?
I
Collective transformation.
Yeah, I think when we do that, that's what we do with groups, because we create that collective value system. How many know what I'm talking about? Like at a date with Destiny and like that. So
Yeah, exactly.
the millennials find it very comfortable as far as that's concerned. And everyone wants to grow, but millennials are also entering a stage, just like they said they weren't going to buy houses. I remember saying, you're idiots to say that. They're not. They look like they're going to buy houses. They're going to buy homes. But what's the different about it is, like you said, a bigger home, a different environment. But now they're entering that stage of life, 40 years old, 35 years old, where they start evaluating. In my experience, transformation in the 20s, you think you're, as I said earlier, you're invincible. When you get to your mid-30s and you have relationships, and then all of a sudden you have a family, and then you have kids, and then all of a sudden things look differently. So I'm seeing that group just as responsive as previous groups, but they like doing it collectively, less individualistic.
And they
they want it done a certain way.
They don't.
They don't want to be unsafe.
You have a problem in America where public speech has become so coarse,
Or comedy.
so wild, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I saw, even in reaction to this, recent school shooting in Texas,
Yeah.
congressmen are trading F-bombs with each other on Twitter. Congressmen. I mean, this
And blaming each other while kids are just dying.
Right, but the point is, the level of discourse is degraded to such a point.
Yes.
And it reminds me, by the way, of the 1850s. We had the same thing. We had congressmen actually shooting and knifing each other, in the middle. And we know where that went. It went to war.
Yeah.
But my point is that this level of incivility, what happens after the crisis with the generation that actually has to fight it, they clean up everything. Language is homogenized. You look at language, political language of the people after actually fighting World War II, particularly by the 1950s, early 1960s, it's all homogenized, cleaned up. It's your Walter Cronkite.
Yes.
Good morning, America. Everything was great today.
Yeah.
But so this has a cycle too.
Because after a crisis, there's so much pain, people want something completely new.
Yes. And this is why identity politics after the crisis is never an issue.
Yeah.
because no one cares about your own individual identity anymore. After what we all did together to get through this thing, your own little identity doesn't matter. And by the way, these are all the great melting pot periods of American history.
Yes.
I mean, you went through World War II. You were no longer a hyphenated American.
That's
you
right.
were no longer an Italian American, a Polish American. We had all those Eastern European hyphenated. They were all just Americans.
Think about cultural appropriation, that term that's been created.
Yeah,
I mean, America is nothing but a melting pot. Everything we do has come from somewhere else. And we used to honor that and think it was a beautiful thing. Now it's part of the crisis creation is that sense of division. And if you look at Ray Dalio, and many of you know Ray, and he's talking about, the changes in the world order that come, there's 3 principles that determine that. 1, are you spending more than you're earning or earning more than you're spending, right? We're obviously spending way more than we're earning. Number 2, level of internal conflict in the country. And number 3, a rising power. Well, rising power takes advantage because your economics are gone and you're completely divided. And that's unfortunately where this country is. Now, it doesn't mean it has to stay there, but that's where this country is right now. So tell us a little bit about, I want to go into the crisis in a second, but I want you just, if you would, you use Jungian archetypes, and you kind of alluded to them a little bit here. And what I found interesting about that is, for example, boomers, when they started out, were very permissive, and then later in life they become very moralistic and very intense. Many people start out one way and end up a different way. Can you explain those 4 archetypes and how you see them attached to these generations that we're familiar with, and all generations you've seen, and how they start one way and why do they become sometimes almost the opposite?
So yes, we attach to these 4 types of generation archetypal names. So for the generation that is born right after the crisis, we call them the prophet archetype, and that would be, for instance, boomers. But we've had many other examples.
Yes.
The original Puritans were actually an example of a prophet archetype generation.
And what are the qualities of a prophet?
So their life cycle, I think you're familiar with. Indulgently raised in a very secure era. They come of age during these times of spiritual awakening, a lot of protest, a lot of social divisions, and they break through. They try to, they want to individualize the country. They want to free individuals from this sort of tyranny of the collective that everyone's been enslaved with. And they don't understand why we had a collective. You had to have gone through the war to understand that, right? And they didn't go through it. That's why they're different. So they want to free everyone from that. And then they go through the fall season, which is a period of individualism. This would have been like the late 80s, the 90s, the early 00s.
Also when financial markets go crazy.